The first thing I saw was a bright yellow $25,000 fine stapled to the door of my grandfather's old barn. 3 HOA board members stood in the grass taking pictures while Denise Whitaker smiled for a group of curious residents. To them, the barn was an eyesore. To me, it was the last place on my land that still sounded like my family. The staple had torn through wood my grandfather had repaired with his own hands. Progress matters more than one old building, Denise said. I didn't argue. I just looked at the county file number written on a faded document sitting in my truck, because Denise thought she was starting a lawsuit. What she was really doing was waking up a historic registry that could stop her entire case before it ever reached court. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is. And if you enjoy property rights stories with real legal twists, consider subscribing. My name is Caleb Mercer, and until Silver Hollow Estates showed up next door, my life was about as quiet as a man could ask for. I lived alone on 18 acres of family land in western Pennsylvania. I wasn't a lawyer, a developer, or some wealthy investor. I was a retired carpenter who spent most mornings fixing fences, cutting firewood, and keeping old things alive a little longer. The barn at the center of the dispute sat on the highest part of my property. Most people saw an aging red structure with weathered boards and a leaning cupola. I saw 4 generations of my family. My great-grandfather built it in 1911. My grandfather repaired it after a windstorm in the 70s. My father stored his tools there until the day he died, and inside, near the south wall, stood an old oak workbench. That workbench mattered more to me than the land itself. My grandfather carved the initials M into one corner when he was 17 years old. Later, my father added his own initials beside them. Mine were there too. 3 generations, 1 piece of wood. When life got difficult after my wife passed away, I'd often sit beside that bench and work on small projects just to keep my hands busy. Silver Hollow Estates arrived about 5 years earlier. At first, we got along fine. Then property values started rising. A developer bought farmland beyond the subdivision and partnered with the HOA board to market a new luxury expansion. That's when Denise Whitaker became a problem. She wasn't loud, she was worse, she was polished. Every conversation sounded reasonable until you realized she was trying to control something that didn't belong to her. The first letter she sent claimed the barn negatively affected the visual appeal of future development lots. The second suggested I paint it. The third recommended landscaping that would hide it from road views. I ignored all 3. Not because I was stubborn, because none of them had authority over my property. A month later, I attended a county planning meeting and noticed something strange. One of the developer's presentation boards showed a rendering of the future neighborhood. The image featured open green meadows, walking trails, luxury homes, perfect views. What it didn't show was my barn. The barn standing directly in the middle of that exact view corridor. That's when I realized Denise wasn't trying to improve the neighborhood. She was trying to erase something that stood in the way of a much bigger plan. And a few days later, she made her first serious move. The first official notice arrived by certified mail. It looked impressive. Bold lettering, legal-sounding language, multiple references to community standards, but the more I read, the less authority it seemed to contain. The document claimed my barn violated shared rural aesthetics, community visual harmony, and neighborhood enhancement objectives. What it didn't contain was a single deed reference, easement number, covenant citation, or county record giving Silver Hollow Estates any control over my property. 2 weeks later, Denise escalated. A second letter arrived. This one included a demand. Either I remove, screen, or substantially alter the barn within 30 days, or the HOA would assess a $25,000 compliance penalty and pursue legal action. I read the entire thing twice. Then I drafted a simple response. No threats. No insults, just one request. Please provide documentation establishing HOA jurisdiction over Parcel 17B, including any recorded easement, covenant, deed restriction, or legal authority granting enforcement rights over the Mercer barn. I sent it by certified mail. A week passed, then another. No documents arrived. Instead, Denise showed up at my property line during a Saturday morning. She stood beside two board members and pointed toward the barn. "You already know what the community wants," she said. I leaned against my truck. "Then it shouldn't be difficult to show me the paperwork." Her smile disappeared. "The neighborhood has already decided what this land is for." I looked at her for a moment. "What land?" She pointed directly at my barn. "That structure affects everyone." I waited. No deed, no map, no easement, nothing. Then she said the sentence that told me exactly who she was. "Your family memories don't override the board." One of the board members looked uncomfortable. I didn't respond. I simply told her that ownership wasn't determined by voting. Then I walked away. 3 days later, the yellow fine appeared on my barn door. $25,000. The notice claimed failure to comply with community directives. Community directives, not legal authority, not ownership, not jurisdiction, just community directives. I photographed everything. The fine, the staples, the location, the board members standing beside it. Then I filed every image into a folder. That evening, another clue appeared. A neighbor I trusted forwarded me a digital copy of a marketing packet being distributed to prospective buyers. Several pages promoted future luxury lots with protected countryside views. One rendering caught my attention immediately. The artist had removed my barn entirely. Not hidden it, removed it, as if it had never existed. And at the bottom of the page sat the logo of the developer working with Silver Hollow Estates. Suddenly, the fine made sense. This wasn't about appearances. It was about money. And someone stood to make a lot of it if my barn disappeared. The situation changed from annoying to serious the following week. I came home from town and found orange survey stakes hammered into the ground around my barn. There were 6 of them, 2 near the foundation, 3 along the access path, 1 directly beneath the small window above my grandfather's workbench. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The stakes hadn't been there that morning. A pickup truck with a contractor logo was parked along the road. 2 men were measuring distances while a woman from the HOA board watched from a folding chair. When I asked what they were doing, one of the contractors looked uncomfortable. "We were told to assess removal access." I stared at him. "Removal of what in?" He glanced toward the barn. That was answer enough. The board member immediately stepped in. "This is part of an ongoing compliance review." I asked the same question I'd been asking for weeks. "Can you show me the recorded authority that allows this review?" No answer. Just more talk about community interests. I photographed every stake, every vehicle, every license plate. Then I sent another certified letter demanding proof of jurisdiction and warning against trespass. 3 days later, Denise left me a voicemail. Her tone was completely different now, less friendly, more threatening. "The board is moving forward regardless of your cooperation, Caleb." I saved the recording, then I backed it up. Twice. The real turning point happened 2 nights later. At nearly 9 o'clock, an email landed in my inbox from someone I didn't recognize. The sender was Martin Hale, a member of the HOA board. The message contained no explanation, only one sentence. "You deserve to know what they're hiding." Attached was a forwarded email chain. I opened it, then I read it 3 times. The first email came from the HOA's attorney nearly 4 months earlier. The attorney warned the board to verify ownership boundaries and investigate whether the Mercer barn had any historic designation before taking enforcement action. The warning couldn't have been clearer. The second email came from Denise. Her response made my stomach tighten. She wrote that delaying enforcement would interfere with the developer's launch schedule and negatively impact premium lot sales. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "Proceed unless someone produces documentation. Not verify, not investigate. Proceed." They had been warned, and they ignored it. Suddenly, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't even about the barn anymore. It was about a board knowingly pushing authority it might not have because money was on the line. The next morning, I called the county recorder's office. An older clerk named Ruth Langley answered. When I mentioned the Mercer barn, she paused. Then she said something that stopped me cold. Mercer barn. A few seconds passed. I think I remember that file. And that's when I realized Denise's biggest mistake might have happened years before she ever became HOA president. The county recorder's office sat inside an old brick building that looked older than most of the homes in Silver Hollow Estates. I arrived when the doors opened. Ruth Langley was waiting behind a counter stacked with maps, plats, and record books. She had worked there for more than 30 years. The moment I mentioned the Mercer barn, she nodded. I knew I'd seen that name before. She disappeared into a records room and returned, carrying a thick archive file. The folder looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Across the front, faded handwriting read, Mercer Timber Barn, 1911. Ruth opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, construction records, historical surveys, and preservation paperwork dating back decades. Then she slid one document toward me, a county preservation certificate. My grandfather's signature sat at the bottom. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. I had never seen that document before. Apparently, years before he died, my grandfather had quietly worked with the County Historical Society to document the barn's significance, not because he expected money, not because he wanted recognition. He simply wanted to make sure the structure survived. Ruth explained it in plain English. The barn isn't just old, she said. It's recognized. Then she pointed to another page. The property had been included in a historic preservation review program and remained protected from unauthorized alteration while its status remained active. In other words, nobody could simply decide to remove it because they didn't like how it looked, especially not an HOA, but Ruth wasn't finished. She pulled out a county plat map. This was the document that changed everything. The map didn't argue. It didn't take sides. It simply showed the line. And the line was nowhere near Silver Hollow Estates. The HOA boundary stopped more than 300 feet from my barn. No overlap, no easement, no recorded authority, no jurisdiction, nothing. Then a county surveyor named Eric Morales joined us. After reviewing the file, he gave me the simplest explanation I'd heard since the dispute began. They may have permission from residents to complain. He tapped the map. But they don't have ownership. Then he tapped the preservation certificate. And they definitely don't have authority to force changes to this structure. I showed him the photographs of the survey stakes and the $25,000 fine. His expression changed immediately. Did they receive notice about any of this? I handed him copies of my certified mail receipts, every letter, every delivery confirmation, every request for proof. He looked at them one by one. Then he shook his head. That was when I understood the real danger Denise had created. The HOA hadn't simply crossed a property line. They had ignored warnings, ignored records, ignored legal boundaries, and now there was written evidence proving they had done it knowingly. As I packed the documents back into the folder, Ruth made one final suggestion. Didn't you say they're holding a public compliance inspection this weekend? I nodded. She smiled. You may want to invite the county. Walking back to my truck, I looked at the preservation certificate again. If that document meant what I thought it meant, Denise hadn't built her case on law. She had built it on air. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, the kind developers love when they're trying to sell expensive lots. Denise had turned the HOA's so-called compliance inspection into a public event. Rows of folding chairs sat near the road. A promotional banner advertised the future expansion project. Potential buyers wandered around carrying brochures. Board members stood smiling beside display boards that showed open countryside views. Conveniently, none of those images included my barn. I parked my truck near the gate and stepped out, carrying a single file box. Denise noticed immediately. "So you finally decided to cooperate," she said. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, another vehicle arrived, then another, county surveyor. Eric Morales climbed out first. Right behind him was Ruth Langley from the preservation office. The smile on Denise's face faded. "What are they doing here?" she asked. I simply said, "Observing." The inspection began. Denise addressed the crowd as if the outcome had already been decided. She described the barn as unsafe, unattractive, and harmful to community property values. Then she announced that legal action was underway. Several residents nodded. A few buyers looked concerned. Then Eric raised a simple question. "Before we continue, can the HOA provide the recorded authority that gives it jurisdiction over this structure?" Silence. Denise glanced toward another board member. Nobody answered. Eric tried again. "Do you own this property?" More silence. Then Denise shifted directions. "This isn't about ownership. It's about community benefit." Eric didn't move. I asked a very simple question. The crowd became noticeably quieter. I opened the file box, one by one. I placed documents on a folding table: the county plat, the preservation certificate, the certified mail receipts, the attorney warning email, finally, the historic registry file. Ruth stepped forward. Then she made the statement that changed everything. "The Mercer Barn is a recognized historic structure under county preservation review. It is located entirely outside Silver Hollow Estates and is not subject to HOA enforcement authority." The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped. A developer representative lowered his brochure. One board member stared at the ground. Another suddenly became fascinated with his phone. Denise tried to argue. Ruth handed her a copy of the preservation certificate. "You were warned to verify historic status before enforcement." Then Eric unfolded the survey map. Even from several feet away, the boundary line was obvious. The HOA wasn't close, not even remotely close. One resident spoke up. "Wait, then why were we told the barn violated HOA rules?" Nobody answered. Another resident asked why HOA money had been spent pursuing a property outside the neighborhood. Still no answer. The final blow came when a sheriff's deputy who had been monitoring the gathering stepped forward. After reviewing the documents, he confirmed that the HOA had no authority to enter, alter, or interfere with the property. Then Ruth attached a county preservation notice to a post beside the barn, right where everyone could see it. The crowd watched in complete silence. The inspection was over, but Denise's problems were only beginning. The fallout lasted much longer than the inspection itself. Within 2 weeks, the HOA's lawsuit was effectively frozen. The combination of the preservation review status, the lack of jurisdiction, and the documented warnings from their own attorney made it nearly impossible for them to move forward without creating even bigger problems. Then residents started asking questions. A lot of questions. Why had HOA funds been spent pursuing a property outside the neighborhood? Why had board members ignored legal advice? Why had buyers been shown marketing materials that removed a real structure from the landscape? The answers were never very convincing. An internal review revealed that more than $38,000 of HOA funds had been spent on consultants, legal preparation, inspections, and development planning related to the barn dispute. Residents were furious. Several demanded refunds. Others demanded resignations. The developer quietly revised its promotional materials and removed every reference to the so-called unobstructed countryside view. The HOA's $25,000 fine against me was formally withdrawn. Every notice was canceled. Every threat disappeared. 3 months later, Denise Whitaker lost her position as HOA president during a board election. 2 other board members resigned shortly afterward. The county never accused anyone of a crime. But public embarrassment did what legal threats couldn't. It ended the fight. The most satisfying moment came on a cool autumn morning. A county crew arrived and installed a small historic marker near the entrance to my property. The plaque recognized the Mercer Barn as an important surviving agricultural structure from the early 20th century. For the first time in years, nobody was talking about tearing it down. Nobody was measuring it. Nobody was threatening it. The barn was finally being left alone. A few days later, I removed the last yellow fine notice that had been sitting inside a folder in my workshop. Then I walked into the barn. Sunlight streamed through the old window above my grandfather's workbench, the same workbench that started this entire fight. I ran my hand across the carved initials. 3 generations, still there, still untouched. That afternoon, I repaired the barn door and gave it a fresh coat of paint. Not because an HOA demanded it, because I wanted to. Because some things deserve to be preserved, not for profit, not for property values, but because they matter. The biggest lesson I learned was simple. Permission is not ownership, volume is not authority, and paperwork matters far more than threats. If you found yourself in my position, what would you have done when that $25,000 fine appeared on your family barn? Have you ever dealt with an HOA, property dispute, or someone claiming authority they didn't actually have? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what you think should have happened. And if you enjoy property rights stories, legal reversals, and satisfying HOA drama, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this.